Would you trade your good name to save someone you love? In November 1933, in the frozen heart of Chicago, a father steps into a bread line that stretches 3 city blocks, just another face among hundreds, until one small detail turns the scene into a moral crossroads. Within hours, a sudden change forces him to choose between the law and his daughter's life, and what happens next will haunt an entire family for decades. Stay with me. Tonight I'll unpack every clue hidden in that photograph and tell you the full story behind the smile that should never have been there. Before we begin, tap subscribe and like, and tell me which city you're watching from. This is a dramatized story drawn from real hardships of the Great Depression. Staying to the end matters because you'll leave with questions that change how you read every historical photograph on this channel. This photograph was taken on November 17, 1933. In the heart of Chicago. A bread line stretching 3 city blocks, hundreds of desperate men waiting for a single meal. But if you look closely at the man in the center, third from the left, you will notice something that should not be there. He is smiling. Not the smile of hope, not the smile of relief, but the smile of a man who knows a terrible secret. A secret that in exactly 48 hours would cost him everything he loved. And if you stay until the end, you will discover why this smile is actually the most heartbreaking thing captured on film during the Great Depression. His name was Thomas Mitchell, 42 years old, former bank manager, husband, father of 3, and the only man in that line who was not there for himself. Because Thomas had already eaten that morning. He had food at home. He had a job waiting for him across town. So why was he standing in a bread line in the freezing November cold, risking everything? The answer is in his coat pocket. A letter, written in his own handwriting. Addressed to his wife, Catherine. A letter she would not read until it was too late. Chicago Historical Society Archives, Mitchell Family Collection, discovered in 1979. But there is something else you need to understand about Thomas Mitchell. Something that made him different from every other man in that line. 6 months earlier, he had been one of the wealthiest men in Chicago. Vice president of Continental Bank, a mansion in Lake Forest, 3 children in private schools, a life that seemed untouchable. Until October 29th, 1929, Black Tuesday. The day the stock market crashed. The day Thomas lost everything. His job, his savings, his home, everything except one thing, his family. And on this cold November morning, he was about to lose that too. The photograph does not show you what Thomas is holding behind his back. His left hand, hidden from the camera, is gripping something so tightly his knuckles have turned white. It is a gold pocket watch, the only valuable possession he has left. Engraved on the back are the words, "To Thomas, on our wedding day. Forever yours, Catherine." He has carried this watch every single day for 20 years. But today is different. Today he plans to trade it. Not for food, not for rent, but for something far more dangerous. Because Thomas Mitchell is not just standing in a bread line. He is standing at the exact location where, in 2 hours, a decision will be made that determines whether his youngest daughter lives or dies. You see, what nobody in that photograph knows, what even the photographer does not suspect, is that Thomas is not unemployed. He has been working, in secret, for 6 weeks, at night, in the warehouses by the docks, doing something illegal. Something that, if discovered, would send him to prison for 20 years. But he had no choice. Because 3 months ago, his 8-year-old daughter Margaret came home from school with a cough, just a cough, nothing serious, until it became pneumonia. And in 1933, pneumonia is a death sentence, unless you have money. Money for medicine, money for doctors. Money Thomas no longer has. The medicine exists. It is called sulfanilamide. New, experimental, expensive. It costs $47. Thomas makes $3 a week at the warehouse. Doing the math is simple. By the time he earns enough legally, Margaret will be dead. The doctor gave her 4 weeks, maybe 5, if she is strong. That was 3 weeks ago. Thomas has 11 days left, maybe 12. And the only way to get $47 in 11 days is to do something unthinkable. So Thomas made a deal with a man named Vincent Russo, a man who runs the warehouses, a man who offers a different kind of job. 1 night of work, 1 delivery, $47 cash, no questions asked. The delivery is tonight, November 17th at midnight. Thomas accepted 3 weeks ago. He has been preparing ever since, learning the route, memorizing the contacts, planning every detail, because if anything goes wrong, he will never see his family again. Prison, or worse. But here is what makes this moment in the photograph so devastating. 2 hours before Thomas stood in this bread line, he received a message. Vincent Russo wants to meet today at 3 p.m. at the soup kitchen where this photograph is being taken. Vincent has changed the plan. The delivery is not tonight. It is happening right now, in broad daylight. And Thomas has to decide, walk away and watch his daughter die, or go through with it and risk everything. So Thomas stands in this bread line, waiting, not for bread, but for Vincent. The photographer thinks he is capturing poverty, hunger, the face of the depression. But what he is really capturing is a father in the last 2 hours before his entire world collapses. Because at 3 p.m. Vincent will arrive. He will hand Thomas a package, and Thomas will have 60 seconds to decide. Take the package and save Margaret, or refuse and lose her forever. But Thomas does not know something crucial, something that changes everything. His wife, Catherine, is standing 3 blocks away, right now, watching. She followed him this morning. She has known about the warehouse job for 2 weeks. She found the letter in his coat pocket, the one he wrote explaining everything, the one he plans to leave behind if things go wrong tonight. And Catherine has made her own decision. A decision that in 90 minutes will force Thomas to make a choice no father should ever have to make. The man standing behind Thomas in the photograph is not just another hungry worker. His name is Detective Robert Hayes, Chicago Police Department, Vice Squad. He has been following Vincent Russo for 6 months. He knows about the warehouses. He knows about the deliveries. He knows about Thomas Mitchell. And he is waiting for 3 p.m. Because when Vincent hands Thomas that package, Detective Hayes will have the evidence he needs. Evidence that will send both men to prison. Evidence that will make Thomas a criminal. Evidence that will leave 3 children without a father. Unless Thomas does something extraordinary in the next 120 minutes. To understand why Thomas Mitchell is smiling in this photograph, you need to go back to when he still believed the world made sense. Back to 1913, 20 years before this breadline. Back to the day he met Catherine O'Brien. Cook County Marriage Records, May 3rd, 1913. Catherine was 19, Irish immigrant, 3rd generation. Working as a secretary at the bank, where Thomas had just been hired as a junior clerk. He was 22, farm boy from downstate Illinois, first person in his family to work in a city, to wear a suit, to believe that hard work and honesty could build a future. Their first conversation lasted 7 minutes. By the end of it, Thomas knew he would marry her. By the end of the month, he had asked. By the end of the year, they had a small apartment on the south side and dreams bigger than the city itself. The next 16 years were everything Thomas had imagined. Promotions, a house, 3 children. Edward born in 1914, Patricia in 1919, Margaret in 1925. Each birth felt like proof that he had done everything right, worked hard, saved money, provided, protected. In 1928, Thomas was promoted to vice president. At 37 years old, He had achieved what his father, a farmer who never earned more than $200 a year, could never have imagined. The American dream, real, tangible, secure. October 29, 1929. Destroyed that illusion in 6 hours. Thomas was at his desk when the first reports came in. Stock prices falling, panic selling. By noon, Continental Bank had lost 40% of its value. By closing, 60%. Thomas tried to stay calm. Banks had survived crashes before. This was temporary, a correction. The market would recover. It always did. He told Catherine that night not to worry. They had savings. They had his salary. They would be fine. But 3 weeks later, Continental Bank closed its doors. Permanently. 1,600 employees lost their jobs in a single day. Thomas was one of them. The savings he thought were safe? Gone. The bank had invested depositor money in stocks. When the market crashed, the deposits vanished. Thomas had $13 in cash, a mortgage payment due in 2 weeks, 3 children who needed food, clothes, school supplies, and a wife who looked at him with eyes that still believed he could fix this. The next 3 years were a slow descent into a nightmare Thomas could not wake up from. He tried everything, applied to every bank in Chicago. None were hiring, most were closing. He took whatever work he could find, day labor, construction, sweeping floors, anything. But jobs were impossible to find. For every open position, 200 men applied. Thomas was competing with men who had been unemployed longer, men who were younger, stronger, more desperate. U.S. Department of Labor statistics show unemployment in Chicago reached 42% in 1932. By 1932, Thomas had sold everything. The house, the furniture, Catherine's jewelry, everything except that pocket watch. They moved into a tiny apartment in a neighborhood where children played in garbage-filled streets and families of 6 shared 2 rooms. Edward, now 18, dropped out of school to look for work. Patricia, 13, started sewing shirts in a factory for 30 cents a day. Margaret, 7 years old, still went to school. Because no matter how bad things got, Thomas and Catherine agreed on one thing. Margaret would finish elementary school. She would have the education they could no longer afford for the older children. She would have a chance. Then, in August 1933, Margaret got sick. It started as a cold, then a fever, then the cough that would not stop. Catherine took her to the free clinic. The doctor listened to her lungs, and his face told Catherine everything she needed to know before he spoke. Pneumonia, advanced. Without medicine, 2 months, maybe 3. With medicine, she might survive. The medicine costs $47. The doctor looked at Catherine with the same expression Thomas had seen on the faces of bank managers, landlords, employers. The look that says, "I am sorry, but there is nothing I can do." Catherine came home and told Thomas. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where they used to plan vacations, discuss the children's futures, dream about retirement. Now they sat in silence, doing math that did not add up. Thomas made $3 a week at odd jobs. $47 would take 16 weeks to earn. Margaret did not have 16 weeks. They could borrow. But from who? Everyone they knew was in the same situation. Banks did not lend to unemployed men. There was no solution, no answer. Just a little girl coughing in the next room, getting weaker every day. That is when Thomas heard about Vincent Russo. Everyone in the neighborhood knew Vincent. He ran the warehouses by the river. He employed men, paid cash, did not ask questions. Thomas had avoided him, because everyone also knew what Vincent really did. Smuggling, bootlegging, things that existed in the shadows of Chicago's underworld. Things that could get you killed or imprisoned. But Vincent paid, and Thomas needed money, not next month, not next week. Now. Thomas went to the warehouse on September 23, 1933, a Saturday night. Vincent was exactly what Thomas expected. Mid-50s, expensive suit, cold eyes. He listened to Thomas explain about Margaret, about the medicine, about needing $47. Vincent did not interrupt. When Thomas finished, Vincent said, "One job, one delivery. Thursday night, midnight. $47 cash when you finish." Thomas asked what he would be delivering. Vincent smiled. "Does it matter?" Thomas thought about Margaret, about Catherine, about the cough getting worse every day. He said yes. For 3 weeks, Thomas prepared. Vincent gave him instructions. Locations, times, contacts. The delivery was simple. Pick up a crate from Warehouse 7, drive it to an address on the north side, hand it to a man named Costello. Drive back. Done. Thomas memorized every detail. He practiced the route. He told Catherine he found night work at a factory. She believed him because she wanted to, because they both needed to believe there was still a way to save their daughter. But on the morning of November 17th, everything changed. A boy came to the apartment with a message. "Vincent wants to see you. Today, 3 p.m. The soup kitchen on State Street." Thomas knew immediately something was wrong. The plan was tonight, midnight. Why change it? Why meet in public? Why during the day? Thomas went to the kitchen where Catherine was making watery soup for lunch. He told her he had to go out. She looked at him with eyes that knew he was lying. That had known for weeks. But she said nothing. Because sometimes love means letting someone believe their secrets are still secret. Thomas stands in the bread line at 2:47 p.m., 13 minutes until Vincent arrives. The November cold cuts through his thin coat like a knife, but he barely notices. His mind is racing through scenarios, calculations, possibilities. None of them good. The watch in his pocket feels heavier with each passing second. Next to him, men shuffle forward slowly, their faces hollow with hunger and defeat. They are waiting for bread. Thomas is waiting for his life to end or begin. He is not sure which. What Thomas does not know is that Catherine is not at home. She left the apartment 15 minutes after he did. She wrapped her only warm shawl around her shoulders and followed him through the gray Chicago streets. She has been standing across State Street, partially hidden behind a postal truck, watching him for the past 20 minutes. In her coat pocket, she carries something that will change everything. A letter, not the one Thomas wrote. A different letter, one she received this morning. Hand-delivered. No return address. The letter contains 3 sentences. Your husband is working for Vincent Russo. The police know. If he makes the delivery, he will go to prison for 20 years. Catherine read the letter 4 times before she understood what it meant. Someone was warning her. Someone who knew about Thomas, about Vincent, about the delivery, someone who wanted to give her a chance to stop it. But stop it how? Tell Thomas? He would deny it. Beg her to let him save Margaret. And what could she say? Let our daughter die so you do not go to prison? What kind of mother chooses that? What kind of wife? But Catherine knows something Thomas does not. She went to the doctor yesterday. Without telling Thomas, she asked about Margaret, about how much time they really had. The doctor was honest, maybe 3 weeks. Maybe 4 if very lucky. But the cough is getting worse. The fever is constant. Without medicine soon, there would be no point in getting medicine at all. Catherine asked about the cost. Still $47. She asked if there were any other options, any experimental programs, any charity cases. The doctor shook his head. Then he said something that Catherine has been unable to stop thinking about. Even with the medicine, her chances are 50-50. Pneumonia. This advanced, in a child this weakened by malnutrition, even sulfanilamide might not work. 50-50. Catherine walked home in a daze. Her husband was planning to destroy his life, abandon his family, risk prison or death for a 50% chance. And if the medicine did not work, if Margaret died anyway, Thomas would be gone, and the two surviving children would have no father, no provider, no protection. Catherine spent the night lying awake next to Thomas, listening to him breathe, watching the clock, doing her own impossible math. 2 children guaranteed to lose their father versus 1 child with a 50% chance of survival. How does a mother calculate that? How does a wife choose? At 2:51 p.m., Catherine sees a black car pull up to the soup kitchen. A man steps out. Expensive overcoat, fedora pulled low. Even from across the street, Catherine knows this is Vincent Russo. She watches him scan the breadline, watches his eyes land on Thomas, watches him begin to walk toward the line, 4 minutes early. Catherine's heart is pounding so hard she can hear it in her ears. She has to do something. Now. But what? Thomas sees Vincent approaching and his stomach drops. This is wrong. Vincent should not be here yet. Should not be walking directly toward him. Should not be reaching into his coat pocket in full view of 200 witnesses. Thomas's eyes dart around the breadline. Looking for what? He is not sure. A way out? A sign? An answer? That is when he sees Detective Hayes, standing 3 men behind him, watching Vincent with the focused intensity of a predator about to strike. Thomas understands everything in that instant. This is a trap. Vincent is being followed. The police are watching. If Vincent hands him anything, if Thomas takes it, he will be arrested on the spot. But if he refuses, Vincent will know he betrayed him. And men who betray Vincent Russo do not live long enough to regret it. Thomas is trapped between prison and death. And he has about 90 seconds to find a third option that does not exist. Vincent reaches the breadline. He does not look at Thomas directly, just stands next to him, casual, like another hungry man waiting for food. Then he speaks, voice low. Change of plans. The delivery happens now. Car around the corner. Keys in your pocket. Drive to the address. Be back in an hour. Same money. Thomas feels something being pressed into his coat pocket. Car keys. He does not move, does not reach for them, just stares straight ahead. Vincent continues. Your daughter does not have much time. I talked to a guy, a doctor. Real doctor, not some clinic hack. He can get the medicine today, but only if you do this now. Thomas closes his eyes. Vincent has done his research, knows exactly how to manipulate him. The promise of a real doctor. Medicine today instead of next week? How can he say no? But his eyes find Detective Hayes again. The detective is watching, waiting. Then Catherine does something that will haunt her for the rest of her life. She steps into the street, walks directly toward the breadline, toward Thomas. Her husband sees her and his face goes white. She should not be here. How did she know? What is she doing? Catherine walks past the line of men, past Vincent, who does not recognize her. She stops directly in front of Thomas, and she says, loud enough for everyone around them to hear, Thomas Mitchell, I need you to come home right now. Margaret is asking for you. The lie is perfect, simple, believable. A wife collecting her husband because their sick child needs him. Vincent cannot object without revealing himself. Detective Hayes cannot stop a wife from taking her husband home. Thomas stares at Catherine, sees something in her eyes. She knows everything, and she is giving him a way out. But taking it means Margaret does not get the medicine, means his daughter has 3 weeks to live. Maybe less. Vincent speaks again, quieter. You walk away now. The offer disappears. Forever. No second chances. No medicine. Think about what that means. Thomas looks at Catherine, then at Vincent, then down at Margaret's photograph, creased and worn, that he keeps in his shirt pocket. The photograph was taken 6 months ago before she got sick. She is smiling, missing her 2 front teeth, holding a doll Catherine made from scraps of fabric. In the photograph, Margaret looks healthy, happy, alive. Thomas makes his decision. He reaches into his coat pocket. Detective Hayes tenses, ready to move. Vincent watches, expressionless. Catherine holds her breath. Thomas pulls out the gold pocket watch, the one engraved with Catherine's words, the last valuable thing he owns. He hands it to Vincent, not the car keys, the watch. And he says, "This is worth $70. Take it for the medicine. I am not doing the delivery." Vincent looks at the watch, then at Thomas. Then he does something unexpected. He smiles. Not a cruel smile, almost respectful. He takes the watch, examines it, then hands it back. "Keep it. Your wife is smarter than you. The setup was police. You would have been arrested before you started the car." Vincent looks at Catherine. "Tell your husband that honor is expensive, especially these days." Then he walks away, disappearing into the crowd. Detective Hayes approaches. He looks at Thomas, at Catherine, at the breadline photographer who just captured the entire exchange without understanding any of it. The detective speaks. "You are a lucky man, Mr. Mitchell. Your wife just saved your life. Now take her home and find a legal way to help your daughter." Thomas nods, unable to speak. Catherine takes his arm. They walk away from the breadline, away from Vincent, away from the decision that almost destroyed everything. But they are walking toward something worse, because when they get home, they will find Margaret collapsed on the floor, fever at 104 degrees, breathing shallow and rapid. They will have no medicine, no money, no options left. And 3 weeks has just become 3 days. November 17th, 1933. 3:47 p.m. Thomas and Catherine climb the 4 flights of stairs to their apartment in silence. Each step feels like walking toward an execution. They both know what they will find. Margaret, getting sicker. The medicine, still impossible to afford. The choice Catherine made, saving Thomas from prison but possibly condemning their daughter to death. Neither of them speaks. What is there to say? They open the apartment door. Edward is kneeling beside Margaret's mattress in the corner. Patricia is holding a wet cloth to their sister's forehead. Margaret's eyes are closed. Her breathing is wrong. Too fast, too shallow. Each breath sounds like it might be the last. Catherine rushes to her daughter's side. Thomas stands frozen in the doorway, the weight of his failure crushing him like a physical thing. Edward looks up at his father. His face is pale. "Dad, she is worse. Much worse. She has been asking for you. Keeps saying she needs to tell you something." Catherine strokes Margaret's hair, whispering soothing words that mean nothing against pneumonia and poverty. Thomas kneels beside his wife, takes Margaret's small hand in his. Her skin is burning hot. Margaret's eyes flutter open. "Daddy," her voice is barely a whisper. "I had a dream. You were standing in a long line with lots of men, and you were smiling, but you were sad inside. Why were you sad, Daddy?" Thomas feels tears running down his face. He tries to answer but cannot find words. "How do you tell your 8-year-old daughter that you were sad because you failed to save her? That you were smiling because you were pretending to be brave?" Catherine speaks instead. "Sweetheart, Daddy is not sad. He is right here. We are all right here." Margaret shakes her head slightly. "No, Mama. In the dream, Daddy was sad because he had to choose between being good and saving me." She coughs, a horrible wet sound that shakes her entire small body. "And I want to tell Daddy. It is okay. I want him to be good, even if I go away." Thomas breaks. He leans forward, pressing his forehead against his daughter's hand, sobbing. "I am so sorry, sweetheart. I am so sorry I could not fix this." Margaret touches his hair with her other hand. You did fix it, Daddy. You are here. That is what fixes it. Then her hand falls back to the mattress. She closes her eyes. Her breathing slows. Catherine checks her pulse. Still there, but weak. So weak. There is a knock at the door. Edward answers it. A man stands in the hallway. Mid-30s, worn suit, medical bag in hand. He speaks. My name is Dr. James Connolly. I am looking for the Mitchell family. Edward steps back, confused. This is them. Who sent you? The doctor enters, moves immediately to Margaret's side, begins examining her with practiced efficiency. He listens to her lungs, checks her temperature, her pulse, her eyes. After 2 minutes, he speaks. Advanced pneumonia. Maybe 48 hours without intervention, possibly less. Thomas stands. We know. We have been to the clinic. We cannot afford the medicine. Dr. Connolly opens his bag, takes out a vial, sulfanilamide. He prepares an injection with swift, confident movements. Thomas grabs his arm. Stop. We cannot pay for that. The doctor looks at him steadily. I am not asking you to pay. Thomas stares. I do not understand. Who sent you? Why are you here? Dr. Connolly administers the injection to Margaret. She barely reacts, too weak to register the needle. He speaks while he works. This morning, a man came to my office. Older gentleman. Expensive coat. He gave me this address and $200. Said a little girl needed medicine. Said her father was a good man who made the right choice. He told me to take care of her and to tell the father that honor is more valuable than money. But sometimes honor needs help. Catherine gasps. Vincent. He sent you. The doctor shrugs. He did not give me his name, just the money and the address. Said to come at 4 p.m. exactly. Said the family would be home by then. He begins preparing a second injection. This is enough medicine for 2 weeks. I will come back every other day to check on her. If she responds to the treatment, and children often do if we catch it in time, she should recover fully. Thomas sits down heavily on the floor. His mind cannot process what is happening. Vincent Russo, a criminal, a smuggler, a man who lives in Chicago's darkest corners, just saved his daughter's life. After Thomas refused to work for him, after Catherine pulled him away from the delivery, Vincent could have walked away, could have let Margaret die as punishment. Instead, he paid for a real doctor, for medicine, for 2 weeks of treatment. Why? Dr. Connolly seems to read his thoughts. The man told me something else. Said to tell you that 20 years ago, someone gave him a second chance when he did not deserve it. Said he never forgot that feeling. Said maybe this evens the score. Then he left. The doctor finishes with Margaret, packs his bag. I will be back Sunday evening to check her progress. Make sure she drinks water. Keep her warm. If the fever breaks in the next 24 hours, that is a very good sign. Catherine walks the doctor to the door, thanking him repeatedly. When he leaves, she returns to Thomas, who is still sitting on the floor, staring at Margaret. She sits beside him, puts her head on his shoulder. They watch their daughter breathe, each breath still labored, but perhaps, maybe, slightly easier than before. They sit like this for an hour, not speaking, just being present for this moment that might be the beginning of Margaret's recovery, or might be their last evening with her alive. They do not know yet, but they have hope. And for the first time in 4 years, hope feels like something real. 3 days later, Margaret's fever breaks. A week later, she is sitting up, eating soup, asking for her doll. 2 weeks later, Dr. Connolly declares her out of danger. The pneumonia is gone. She is weak, needs to regain weight and strength, but she will live. She will grow up. She will have a future. Thomas and Catherine hold each other and cry, not from sadness this time, from relief, from gratitude, from the overwhelming weight of love that almost crushed them but somehow, impossibly, held them together instead. Thomas never sees Vincent Russo again. He hears about him occasionally over the years, hears that Vincent eventually went to prison, died there in 1947. But Thomas never forgets what Vincent did. Never forgets that a criminal showed him more mercy than the economic system that destroyed his life. Never forgets that sometimes the world is more complicated than good and evil, legal and illegal, right and wrong. The photograph taken in that bread line on November 17, 1933, travels a strange journey. The photographer, a man named Samuel Levine working for the Farm Security Administration, develops it and files it away. It sits in archives for years, decades. In 1979, a researcher studying the Great Depression finds it. Notices the man in the center with a strange smile. Tries to identify him. Eventually traces him through church records, employment documents, immigration papers, Chicago Historical Society, Depression, Era Photography Project, 1979. The researcher, a woman named Dr. Ellen Reeves, locates Thomas Mitchell's family. By then, Thomas has been dead for 12 years. Catherine is 85, living with Margaret in a small house in Oak Park. Dr. Reeves visits them, shows them the photograph, asks if Catherine can identify the man. Catherine looks at the photograph for a long time, touches the image of Thomas's face, his smile. Then she tells Dr. Reeves the whole story, everything, the warehouse job, Vincent, the bread line, Dr. Connolly, Margaret's recovery. Dr. Reeves asks if she can publish the story. Catherine agrees, but asks for one thing. Do not make Vincent a hero. He was not a hero. He was a criminal who did one good thing. And do not make Thomas a victim. He was not a victim. He was a man who faced an impossible situation and chose love over survival, integrity over desperation. That is not a victim. That is a father. Margaret Mitchell grows up. The pneumonia that almost killed her at 8 years old leaves no permanent damage. By her 10th birthday, she is healthy, strong, running through Chicago streets with other children who survived the Depression's cruelties. She never forgets the weeks she spent dying, the feeling of her father's tears on her hand, the strange doctor who appeared like a miracle. But she also never lets it define her. In 1945, at 20 years old, Margaret volunteers as a nurse's aide during World War II. She works at a veterans hospital on Chicago's South Side, changing bandages, writing letters for soldiers who cannot hold pens, sitting with men who wake screaming from nightmares. She sees things that would break most people. Sees death, trauma, bodies destroyed by war. But Margaret has seen death before, has felt it reaching for her when she was too young to understand what it meant. So she does not break. She helps others survive what she once survived. Veterans Administration Records, 1945-1947. After the war, Margaret becomes a teacher. Elementary school, 3rd grade. The same age she was when pneumonia tried to steal her future. She teaches in poor neighborhoods, schools where children come hungry, where parents work 2 jobs and still cannot afford winter coats. She recognizes in their eyes what she once felt, the fear that childhood is not safe, that adults cannot always protect you, that the world is harder than it should be. Margaret never marries, not because she cannot find love, but because she decides her love should go elsewhere. To her students. To the children who need someone to believe in them the way her parents believed in her. She teaches for 43 years, retires in 1990 at 65 years old. Her former students, now adults, come to her retirement party. There are over 200 people. Each one has a story about how Miss Mitchell changed their life, believed in them, fought for them, saved them. Thomas Mitchell lives until 1967. He never returns to banking. The depression destroys his faith in that world. Instead, he finds work as a bookkeeper for small businesses, shops, restaurants, places where owners shake his hand and pay him in cash at the end of each week. He never makes much money, never regains the wealth he lost in 1929. But he provides. The apartment stays small but warm. The children all finish school. Edward becomes a mechanic, Patricia a seamstress, Margaret a teacher. Thomas considers this success. Catherine outlives Thomas by 17 years. She dies in 1984 at 90 years old. Until the end, she keeps 3 things on her bedside table. A photograph of Thomas taken on their wedding day. A photograph of their 3 children together at Christmas 1946. And that gold pocket watch. The one Thomas almost gave to Vincent Russo. The one that says, "Forever yours, Catherine." The watch stopped working in 1952, but Catherine never gets it repaired. She says it is not meant to tell time anymore. It is meant to remember a specific moment. November 17th, 1933. The moment her husband chose honor over desperation. The moment she chose to save him instead of condemning him. Dr. Reeves publishes her research about the breadline photograph in 1981. It appears in a historical journal, then gets picked up by larger publications. The photograph becomes famous in academic circles, then more widely known. It is used in textbooks about the Depression, in documentaries, in museum exhibitions about poverty and resilience. But the story behind it, the story Catherine told Dr. Reeves, remains less known. Most people see the photograph and see only suffering, only hunger, only the failure of an economic system. They do not see what Catherine saw. They do not see a man choosing between survival and integrity. They do not see a wife choosing to save her husband, even if it means losing her daughter. They do not see a criminal with enough humanity left to show mercy. They do not see a family held together not by money or security or even hope, but by the stubborn refusal to let go of each other, even when letting go would be easier. Margaret keeps the original photograph in a drawer in her bedroom, not displayed on a wall, not framed prominently, just in a drawer, wrapped in soft cloth, taken out occasionally when she needs to remember. Remember what her father's face looked like the moment before everything changed. Remember that love is not just a feeling but a series of choices, some of them impossible, all of them necessary. Remember that survival is not the same as living, and sometimes the only way to truly live is to risk not surviving. In 2003, Margaret is diagnosed with lung cancer. The doctors say it might be related to the childhood pneumonia, the scarring it left behind, the vulnerability it created. She is 78 years old. She has lived 70 years longer than anyone expected. In November 1933. She considers this a gift. She does not fight the cancer aggressively, does not pursue experimental treatments, does not rage against the dying of the light. She has seen too much death to fear it. Instead, she spends her final months writing letters to former students, to friends, to family. Her last letter is to Dr. Ellen Reeves, the researcher who found the photograph and told her family's story. Margaret writes, "Thank you for seeing my father's smile and knowing there was more behind it. Thank you for caring enough to find the truth. But I want you to know something. The photograph is not the story. The photograph is just 1 second of one day. The story is what my parents did every day after that. The story is 50 more years of choosing each other, of choosing us, of choosing to believe that kindness matters even when the world proves otherwise." Margaret dies on October 15th, 2003. She is buried next to her parents in a cemetery on Chicago's West Side. The funeral is attended by hundreds, former students, now in their 60s and 70s, children of former students, grandchildren, people whose lives were touched by a woman who survived death at 8 years old and spent the rest of her life teaching others how to survive their own impossible moments. The photograph remains in Margaret's house after her death. Her niece, Patricia's daughter, inherits it along with other family documents. The niece keeps it in the same drawer where Margaret kept it, wrapped in the same cloth, taken out occasionally to remember, to explain to her own children and grandchildren what it means to love someone enough to risk everything, what it means to choose integrity when survival is at stake, what it means to smile even when you are breaking inside, because sometimes smiling is the only way to find the strength to take the next step. This is what the photograph captures, not poverty, not hunger, not the failure of the American dream, but something more fundamental. The moment a father chooses to be worthy of his daughter's love rather than just her survival. The moment before a wife saves her husband from himself. The moment when a criminal remembers his own humanity. The photograph captures the instant before grace arrives, unexpected and unearned, proving that sometimes mercy exists in the most unlikely places. The breadline photograph of November 17, 1933, teaches us that history is not made only by presidents and generals and economic policies. It is made by ordinary people facing extraordinary choices in the frozen moments between one breath and the next. It is made by fathers who stand in breadlines not for bread, but for redemption. By mothers who follow their husbands into danger not to stop them, but to offer them a way back. By criminals who remember what it felt like to receive a second chance and decide to give one to someone else. The photograph teaches us that love is not a feeling that makes choices easy. Love is the thing that makes choices impossible and then demands we make them anyway. It is Thomas choosing between saving Margaret and destroying his family. It is Catherine choosing between her husband's freedom and her daughter's life. It is Vincent choosing between profit and mercy, when nothing in his world rewards mercy. These are not choices anyone should have to make, but they are the choices that define what it means to be human. The photograph teaches us that survival is not enough. Thomas could have made the delivery, could have saved Margaret and gone to prison. His family would have survived. Catherine could have stayed home, let Thomas walk into the trap, preserved her daughter at the cost of her husband. The family would have survived. But survival without integrity is just a slower form of death. What Thomas and Catherine understood, what they taught their children through their choices, is that some things matter more than survival. That who you are matters more than whether you continue to exist. The photograph teaches us that the Depression was not just an economic catastrophe, it was a moral testing ground. It took millions of ordinary people and asked them, who are you? When everything is taken away, what do you choose when all your choices are impossible? The photograph shows us one man's answer. Not a perfect answer, not a heroic answer, but an honest answer. I am a father who will do anything to save my daughter, except the things that would make me unworthy of being her father. Years after Margaret's death, a graduate student at Northwestern University studying Depression-era photography finds Dr. Reeves's article about the breadline photograph. The student, a young woman named Jennifer Chen, becomes fascinated by the story. She tracks down Margaret's niece, asks if she can see the original photograph, asks if she can include the full story in her dissertation. The niece agrees, but she makes Jennifer promise something. Promise me you will tell people that this is not a story about the Depression. This is a story about a family that refused to let the Depression define them. Jennifer writes her dissertation. It is titled, Between Bread and Dignity: The Untold Stories Behind Depression-Era Photography. The breadline photograph is on the cover. Inside, Jennifer includes not just Thomas and Catherine's story, but the stories of 12 other people in that same breadline. Stories she reconstructs through archives, interviews with descendants, church records, newspaper clippings. Each person in that line has a story. Each one made choices. Each one survived or did not survive. Each one is more than just a face in a photograph about poverty. The dissertation wins awards. gets published as a book in 2009. The book becomes required reading in several university history programs. The breadline photograph is no longer just an image of suffering. It becomes a portal into the complexity of human choice, the weight of love, the price of integrity. Students who see the photograph now know to look closer, to see Thomas's smile and ask why, to notice the detective behind him, to wonder about the stories of the other men in the line, to understand that history is not just what happened, but why people chose to let it happen the way it did. In 2015, a teacher in Chicago uses the photograph in her 8th grade history class. She shows the image on a projector, asks her students what they see. They say, hungry men, sad faces, hard times. Then she tells them Thomas's story. She reads them Margaret's letter to Dr. Reeves. She asks them, what would you have done if you were Thomas, if you were Catherine, if you were Vincent? The classroom erupts in debate. Some students say Thomas should have made the delivery, saved his daughter no matter what. Others say Catherine made the right choice. Others argue Vincent was still a criminal, that one good deed does not erase a lifetime of bad ones. The teacher lets them argue. Then she says, this is why we study history. Not to memorize dates and names, but to understand that people in the past faced the same impossible choices we face now. That they loved and feared, and hoped and failed just like we do. That we can learn from their choices, even when their choices were not perfect. That history is not about being right. It is about being human. One of the students, a girl named Ashley, whose family struggles with poverty similar to what the Mitchells faced, raises her hand. She asks, did Margaret ever regret that her father did not make the delivery? I mean, she almost died. Does she ever wish he had just taken the risk? The teacher reads another section from Margaret's letter. The part where Margaret wrote, my father gave me something more valuable than medicine. He gave me the knowledge that I was loved, but not at the cost of his soul. He taught me that some prices are too high even when the alternative is unbearable. Ashley sits quietly for a moment. Then she says, I think I understand. The teacher nods. What do you understand? Ashley says, sometimes the right choice is the one that hurts the most. And sometimes love means making someone hurt now so they do not have to hurt worse later. The teacher smiles. Yes. That is exactly what the photograph is about. The breadline photograph of November 17, 1933, continues to exist. It is preserved in archives, reproduced in textbooks, displayed in museums. But its real life is not in institutions. Its real life is in drawers and wallets and family albums. It is in the copy that Patricia's grandson keeps folded in his wallet, pulling it out occasionally to remember where he comes from. It is in the digital file that Edward's great-granddaughter posts on social media every November 17th with the caption, remember that survival is not the same as living. It is in the lesson Margaret taught her students, that Catherine taught her children, that Thomas learned standing in that breadline with a smile on his face and terror in his heart. The photograph's real life is in the questions it continues to ask. What would you sacrifice for someone you love? What price is too high? When is survival not worth the cost? How do you choose between impossible options? What does it mean to be good when being good might cost you everything? These are not questions with easy answers. They are not questions that history resolves. They are questions each generation must answer for themselves. Thomas Mitchell's smile in that photograph is not the smile of a man who has found answers. It is the smile of a man who has accepted the questions, who understands that life will not stop being impossible just because he wishes it would, who knows that in a few minutes he will have to make a choice that will define the rest of his life, who has decided that whatever happens, he will face it honestly. Not heroically, not perfectly, but honestly. That smile is the most honest thing captured during the Great Depression, because it admits what most people could not admit: that they were terrified, that they did not have answers, that they were improvising, hoping, guessing, and praying, that their choices would not destroy everything they loved. The Depression did not create heroes. It created millions of Thomas Mitchells. Ordinary people forced to make extraordinary choices with insufficient information and too much at stake. The photograph endures because it captures truth. Not historical truth, though it does that too, but human truth. The truth that love is complicated, that integrity is expensive, that mercy exists in unexpected places, that families survive not because they are strong, but because they refuse to stop holding on to each other, even when letting go would be easier. That sometimes the most important choice you make is not whether to succeed or fail, but whether to be worthy of the people who love you. Margaret Mitchell's niece, now 70 years old, still keeps the photograph in her drawer, still takes it out occasionally, still shows it to her grandchildren and tells them the story. The story changes slightly each time, the way all oral histories do. Small details shift. The dialogue becomes more polished. The coincidences align more neatly. But the core remains. A father in a breadline, a mother who followed him, a daughter who almost died, a criminal who chose mercy, a family that survived by refusing to compromise who they were even when compromise would have been easier. The grandchildren ask, "Is it a true story?" The niece answers, "It is a story about true people." That is not quite the same thing as a true story, but it is more important. Because true stories just tell you what happened. Stories about true people tell you what it meant. And what it meant is that your great-great-grandfather loved his children more than he loved his own life. And your great-great-grandmother loved her husband more than she loved certainty. And sometimes, when people love each other that much, grace finds a way to arrive even in the middle of a depression that destroyed millions of families who loved each other just as much. The photograph teaches us that grace is not fair. The Mitchells survived. Margaret lived. But thousands of other families in Chicago that winter did not survive. Thousands of other children died of pneumonia because their fathers did not meet a Vincent Russo. Thousands of other mothers watched their children die and their husbands break and had no researcher to tell their story 70 years later. The photograph cannot save them. The story cannot redeem their suffering. All it can do is witness. All it can do is say, "This happened. These people existed. Their choices mattered. Their love was real. And we remember." That is enough. Not because it changes the past, but because it changes us. Every time someone looks at that photograph and sees not just suffering, but also choice, not just poverty, but also integrity, not just survival, but also love, Thomas Mitchell's smile means something. Every time a student argues about what they would have done, Catherine's choice matters. Every time a teacher uses the photograph to explain that history is made of human decisions, not just economic forces, Margaret's survival has purpose. The breadline photograph of November 17, 1933, is not in a museum. It is not on public display. It sits in a drawer in a house in Oak Park, Illinois, wrapped in cloth that is now 80 years old, touched by hands that remember the people in the story not as historical figures, but as family, as real, as flawed and brave and terrified and loving as anyone you have ever known. And perhaps that is exactly where it should be. Not elevated as an icon, not sanitized as history, but kept close, kept personal, kept human. A reminder that the most important moments in history are not the ones that change the world, but the ones that change a single family and, in changing them, teach the rest of us what it means to choose love when love demands everything we have and offers no guarantee of return. This is the story of the breadline photograph. This is what Thomas Mitchell's smile means. This is why we remember. Here's a documentary-toned closing you can paste after the story. Written as a continuous outro, clearly noting it's a fictional dramatization inspired by real events of the Great Depression in the United States. In the end, Thomas's smile reminds us that dignity can cost more than survival, and that love sometimes asks for choices that hurt before they heal. History isn't only policy and dates, it's the private courage of ordinary people under unbearable pressure, a mirror for our own lives. What would you have chosen in Catherine's place? Protect the family's future or risk everything for a chance today? Where do you draw the line between necessity and integrity? When has mercy from an unexpected source changed what you believed about good and bad? If this closing moved you, write the word holdfast in the comments so I know you stayed with the story to the very end. Tell me which city you're watching from, and, if you wish, share a family memory from the old days that could inspire future episodes on this channel. Please subscribe, like, ring the notification bell, and share or comment to keep this work alive. And tap the end screen card to continue with the next video. Thank you for watching this dramatized, respectfully told story, drawn from real historical hardships, meant to carry forward lessons of courage, conscience, and care.